Pretty amazing, right? I got to go source product at Yiwu China at the world's largest wholesale market, and I'm going to be sharing everything. There's so much to talk about from this trip, and I'm going to share all of it. I'm going to share my biggest takeaways from the trip, if I'd do it again, if I found any products that made me millions. I'm also going to talk about how this trip completely changed my business. And of course, we have to talk about the food, right? Because that's a question that everyone has. This video is going to be packed with photos, videos, all of it from this trip to show you Shanghai and also the market in Yiwu that I went to. And to say this trip was life-changing is an understatement. I'm gonna make some tea while I fill you in on a little bit of the backstory that led to me going to China. First video in my 5-part series that I just did, you'll remember me saying that I took a step back from my clothing business in 2019 and had just started a home decor business. So I was still doing the clothing, but also had just started with a home decor product. I'll do a whole video on my home decor business at a later time, but at this time I had just started selling a single item and it was doing very well. I had actually planned on this being kind of a one-off item, and the item did so well that I decided I was going to develop a few more items and start a home decor line. Around this time, I learned about a group that was taking people to Yiwu China to source products, and it really piqued my interest. Most of these people that were going on these trips were Amazon sellers. I, at the time, did not have an Amazon business. I really didn't know anything about Amazon, and the whole process of Amazon really felt overwhelming to me, but I also wanted to go on the trip just to source products for my own business, not even putting them on Amazon. I had heard about the Yiwu market, and honestly, I would never be brave enough to have gone on my own, but since there was a group going, that idea really excited me. I quickly decided to join the group and had a really limited time to get my passport ready, my visa, and my airfare, and everything else was going to be handled by the group. So those were basically the only 3 things that I really needed to focus on getting. So on April 10th of 2019, I boarded a plane to LAX where I would spend the night, and then the next morning I'd be getting on a plane to Shanghai and flying business class. This was my first time flying into LAX. This was my first time going out of the country. This was my first time flying business class. I hadn't even ever been on any other airline other than Southwest, and I was going to be flying Delta. So there was a lot of firsts on this trip for me. I was definitely overwhelmed, but I was also really excited. So I remember getting to the airport and going and checking in, and if you fly business class with Delta, they had their own special like check-in area where you went and checked in. It felt really cool. And then they would take you to the business lounge. And so I went to the lounge, never been to a lounge. I was just completely out of my element. I sat in the lounge, I did a little work, I ate a snack, I basically just looked around and took it all in. And then it was time to board the plane. Let me just tell you how excited I was to be flying business class. Have you ever been to like Disney World or Disneyland and you get those fast pass tickets and there's all these people standing in line and they're all hot and miserable and they've been standing there for so long, and you've got this fast pass ticket and you just get to walk right by them. It's like the best feeling in the world, and they're just looking at you filled with so much envy. Now, I've been in both spots. I've been in that line and I've had the fast pass ticket, and having the fast pass ticket definitely is better. That's how I felt in business class, walking by everyone. On my plane, there was 2 different entrances. So you walked into business class one way, you walked into all the other seats the other way, but you could definitely see those people looking into business class. I know I've done it whenever I've flown, and it felt really good to be climbing into one of those really comfortable seats for what was going to be a very long flight. So at the time, I was definitely not a pro at using credit card points for flights. So in hindsight, I should have definitely figured out how to pay for this flight with credit card points, but I ended up paying out of pocket. I think it was about $5,000, which seemed like a lot of money, but trust me, it was so worth it, especially for the trip home, which I'll get into later. But I made the most out of this flight. I watched so many movies, got work done, pushed every button. I was like a little kid in that seat, just trying everything out. And it was the most amazing experience. I ate some really great food and some not so great food, but finally I put my slippers on and covered up with the blanket they gave me, and I laid down and took a nap for a while. After 14 hours, we touched down in Shanghai at night. I arrived at the airport and I had no idea where to go. Luckily, I recognized a couple people that were in a group call before we left, and I saw them ahead of me. I couldn't catch up to them, but it was really nice because I could kind of follow them through customs and know where I was going and follow them to the exit. And got to the exit and there was a car waiting for all of us, and we got in the car, took us to our hotel, and we arrived at by far one of the nicest hotels I've ever stayed in. I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but this was definitely not it. So the next morning, everyone met for breakfast. It was an amazing breakfast buffet. Seriously, like one of the best buffets I've ever eaten at for breakfast. So I got to meet pretty much everyone in the group, and we ate breakfast together and then met up in the lobby and boarded a bus to do sightseeing in Shanghai for a day. Shanghai was absolutely incredible. Again, I don't know what I was expecting. I didn't do any research on Shanghai before I left, but it was just such an incredible experience and more than I ever thought it would be. We had a tour guide and just went to so many popular spots. Then the next day, we got up early and boarded a train to Yiwu. So after the train ride, we arrived at our second hotel, which was in Yiwu. And when I thought the first hotel was pretty amazing, the second hotel was even better. Once we got settled in, we did have time to go to the market that day and kind of get the lay of the land. And that was really exciting. This market is huge. I mean, just massive. And I certainly do not take enough pictures of this place to do it justice, but I was definitely overwhelmed and very excited. So how it would work was that we would each have our own translator and they would walk around with us. We could go wherever we wanted in the market. We would have 3 days there. And the translator would talk to the people who were in the booths and they would get information on any item that we wanted. So all we'd have to do is point at an item, they'd set it aside, and then continue that process. And then once we were all done picking our items from that booth, they would set them all out, they would get prices for each one, get information for each one, what the MOQ was, pricing, ship time, all of the information. And they would compile it into a list for us. And then at the end of each day, we would get an email with all the information for every item that we looked at. Pretty smooth. Walking around that market, I had no idea how I was going to cover all of that ground in 3 days. I mean, there were so many things I wanted to look at. I definitely got shiny object syndrome constantly there. I thought of probably 10 different businesses that I could start, and it was really hard to stay focused on what I was there for, which was clothing and home decor. So the next morning we met again for breakfast. We met our translators, had a short meeting, and then went to the market, and it was definitely an experience. I spent most of my first day looking at accessories, which were like hair accessories to go with my clothing business. I wasn't real sure at the time which direction I wanted to take my clothing business. If I wanted to do kids clothing, keep it women's clothing, if I wanted to add accessories, I just wasn't real sure. So I wanted to make sure and go through that area. And again, there were so many items that it was just hard to stay focused and not think of 10 different businesses that you could start. So I spent my first day mostly in accessories. I kind of walked through the home decor knowing that I would be covering that the next day. And then I took just a little bit of time just to kind of go through areas that didn't necessarily excite me to sell, but I just kind of wanted to go through as much of the market as I could. So I saw water bottles, stuffed animals, backpacks. I mean, anything and everything you could want is at this market. So that night after the market, we went to a fun street market, which was definitely an experience. So many different kinds of food there that I would never try, but it was really fun to go experience it. Lots of street vendors and just the atmosphere was really fun. So day 2 for me was spent in home decor, and if I thought I was overwhelmed the first day, I was so overwhelmed the second day. There was so much stuff. I didn't even know. I'm sure my translator was like, how many businesses does this girl have? Because I was just had so many items that I was having her take notes on. It was crazy, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything and that I thought of everything. So the last day I ended up going through the clothing area, which I wasn't overly impressed with the clothing area in Yiwu. I didn't actually end up sourcing anything from this area, spoiler alert. But I still got some good ideas. It was good for just kind of cultivating ideas and seeing what else was out there. So I took some time and went through the clothing area. Definitely should have used at least half that day to go back through the home decor area. But again, by this point, it was such long days and I was so overwhelmed and I was just trying to cover as much ground as possible. So that night we did a big dinner with the whole group before the first half had to fly out. So some of us had one extra day and some of us had to fly out a day early. So I was in the group that was staying an extra day. And so we kind of had a farewell dinner for that first group that had to leave. And then we would be taking the train back to Shanghai the next day. So we rode the train back to Shanghai. I finally broke down and had to use one of the toilets at the train station, which I was trying to make it through the whole trip without having to use one of these toilets because obviously they don't look like fun. But I broke down, had the experience, had to use this toilet, which it wouldn't have been that bad, but everyone in my group was like waiting for me outside. So I was about the only one who had to use the bathroom and everyone in the group was just standing outside like waiting for me. So that put a little added pressure on trying to like figure out how to use this toilet, and it was a whole experience. But honestly, I'm glad I did it because it's part of it, right? So we got some snacks, we boarded the train, and we headed back to Shanghai. And everyone was pretty exhausted heading back to Shanghai, but it was just a really nice, relaxing trip back. So we went back to Shanghai and saw a few more sites that we hadn't seen yet. And we also went back to the market where it's like they sell knockoff things. So we did that, and that's kind of where the trip started to take a turn for me. So I started feeling really sick at the market, like to the point of having to just lay down on a bench while everyone else was shopping. And I don't know what happened. I still don't know what happened, but by the time we got back on the bus, I laid down on the bus and just fell asleep the whole way to the airport, and got to the airport and I was really sick. So finally made it onto the plane, and this is where business class really paid off, because if I hadn't have had that bed, I honestly don't know what I would have done. I laid down and I slept for about 12 hours on that flight, and it was incredible. And again, I'm not sure what I would have done without that. Okay, let's talk about what I learned on this trip, because there was a lot. So first of all, let's talk about the connections that you make, because I think when people go on these trips, they think automatically that the biggest thing that you're gonna get out of it is sourcing at the market, which it is, it's huge. But the connections that are made in these group events are amazing. So I actually didn't know when I signed on to the trip, but there was a guy on the trip that actually was in a previous mastermind that I had been a part of. And we had gotten along really great in the mastermind, and I didn't know that he was going to be on this trip, but there he was. And it was really amazing to reconnect with him. And honestly, he was doing 8 figures when I was doing 7 figures, and he's been a really great mentor to me and just someone that I can call on when I have questions or need some feedback. And that relationship has been really valuable to me, and I wouldn't have reconnected with him had I not seen him again on this trip. I also met another person on this trip who had Amazon experience, which pretty much everyone in the business did, but not everyone was willing to share that information. So this guy was super helpful with all things Amazon. Every night after the market, even though we were exhausted, he would teach me anything he could about Amazon. And going into this trip, I really had no desire to do an Amazon business, but after talking to him, I really wanted to do an Amazon business. So some way, somehow, I talked him into helping me start my Amazon business. And although I don't sell on Amazon now, and I probably never will, I'm so glad that I sold on Amazon at that time, because when I sold my business, having that Amazon component was really valuable in helping me sell the business. Without that, I'm not sure what selling my business would have looked like. So that was a huge win for me in finding someone who was willing to help me and share their information with me. So always keep that in mind when you're going on these trips and joining masterminds, anything like that, is that the connections are so valuable. So always make sure to connect with as many people as you can and be really open-minded to making those connections. Okay, moving on to the market. I have so many thoughts on the market. Okay, so obviously going into it, I didn't know anything about what I was going to be doing. And looking back now, immediately after I felt better, I wished I could have gotten on a plane and gone back with the knowledge that I had from the first trip. So I think that's pretty normal for anything that you do the first time, right? You have to learn the ropes. And I wish that I had known more and been more prepared, because that would have made a massive difference in my sourcing process. I also wish that we would have had more time. So I think 5 days minimum would be what I would want the next time I would go, because that would just allow you to take some breaks. I would have loved to have had time just to go back to the hotel maybe at lunch and take a little break and collect my thoughts and make some notes and do some research. But I felt like my time was so limited at the market that I needed all of that time to be at the market. So really your only time to go through that kind of stuff was at night, when you were already exhausted from walking tens of thousands of steps all day long and just being completely mentally exhausted. In my opinion, having a translator is 100% necessary. So I'm not sure how I would have gotten along without a translator. So in thinking about doing this by myself, I would definitely want to find a translator to go with me to the market, because the process was so smooth with them knowing exactly how to talk to the people in the booths and writing everything down for you. I didn't have to worry about getting things mixed up or not knowing what they were saying, stuff like that. So in my opinion, having a translator is a non-negotiable for me. Now, the group that I went with to Yiwu obviously shut down in 2020, so they haven't scheduled any more trips to Yiwu. I'm hoping that they start back up, but as of right now, I don't know of another group like this that goes to Yiwu. I know there's a couple that go to Canton Fair, which is definitely high on my list to go to, but I'm definitely hoping to get back to Yiwu. The next bit of advice is for Amazon sellers. If you're an Amazon seller, have all of your keyword research done before you go. Obviously, you're gonna get there, you're gonna find items that you're going to want to research keywords on, but definitely have a ton of good keyword ideas before you go into the market. And even if you're not on Amazon, you can still use those tools to do keyword research and see what people are looking for on Amazon. Because if they're looking for it on Amazon, they're probably looking for it everywhere. So definitely having keywords and knowing what you're looking for is super helpful. All right, I want to answer some questions that you may have about the Yiwu market. Who is this market for? So I think this market is for anyone who currently has a business or is thinking about starting a business. If you're going, I would definitely have an idea of what you're looking for. Now, sure, you can go and everything that's there is going to spark ideas for you. The problem with that is that everything is there. So you may still come home not having any idea what you want to do, because you could be so overwhelmed by all of the possibilities that you aren't able to narrow down. So to really use your time wisely, I would definitely have a list of items that you're looking for or business ideas that you want to start. If you currently have a business, I would definitely take most of your time looking for items to expand your business. However, I would take a little bit of time just to walk around and see if there's anything that catches your eye that could be a possibility to add to your current business that you hadn't thought of before. Again, shiny object syndrome is real at this market, so just know that going in and stay strong and know what you're looking for. Were things made well? So I felt like everything was made pretty great. I mean, it's really like anything else. Some things are well made and some things aren't. And that's not necessarily because it's made in Yiwu. I know Yiwu can get kind of a bad name as far as being a cheap place to source products, but there were definitely manufacturers that were higher end, and there were definitely manufacturers that I wouldn't have bought anything from. But I feel like that's pretty much anywhere. If I go on Alibaba, it's the same thing. There's some manufacturers that the quality's great and some that aren't. So I definitely wouldn't write off Yiwu as being a cheaper place where the manufacturing isn't great. How did the process of buying work? Okay, so I talked a little bit about this earlier in the video, but with the translator, it was really smooth. They would go into the booth with me. I would point at items. They would pull them off the shelf. They'd set them on the floor or set them off to the side. And then once I was done going around the booth and picking all the items out that I wanted, they would talk to the person who was working the booth. They would get all of the pricing, the MOQ, any information, what the item was made of, and they would compile that all onto a sheet for me. So at the end of the day, I had the manufacturer information, I had the MOQ, the pricing, I had everything. When it did come time to order, you're supposed to go through your translator to order because this company obviously makes money. They make some sort of commission from being the translator. So at the end of the day, you're supposed to place your orders through this translator for each business. What I did when I went around the market is I did just make sure to take pictures of all of the booth names. And the first time I did go through the translator for most of the stuff that I ordered, but the next time around I just went out on my own and reordered or ordered stuff that I wanted directly through the manufacturer. Did I source anything at the market for my business? Yes, I did. I found two amazing manufacturers. Now, I sourced a lot of just kind of one-off items from different manufacturers, but I did find two major manufacturers, and the products that I sourced from them were incredible. And I sourced some products that they just had in their booth, but then I also got into custom design with them and created my own products with them. So all in all, with those manufacturers, I probably made hundreds of thousands of dollars with those items. Was the time and money worth it to travel to the Yiwu market for my business? Absolutely. I would do it again tomorrow. So all in all, I probably spent about $20,000 on the trip. I'm not quite sure down to the penny, but probably around that area. So I mentioned that I found two really great manufacturers, and they were manufacturers that I used through my entire home decor business. So hundreds of thousands of dollars generated from these two manufacturers. If I had gone and found one manufacturer, it would have been worth the trip. It's kind of like when they say if you read a book and you get one thing out of that book, it was worth it. And I feel this way about the trip. If you find one manufacturer who can really make a difference in your business, it's totally worth the trip. On top of that, I reconnected with the guy I was talking about, and he's become a mentor to me, which definitely is valuable to me. And also the other guy I talked about that helped me with my Amazon business, and that was insanely valuable to me. So had I gone and not even met a manufacturer, just those connections would have made the trip worthwhile for me. A couple of the nights, I was also able to sit down with manufacturers that I was already using. They actually made the trip to Yiwu to come talk to me at the hotel, and they brought me samples. I got to meet with them face to face for the first time. And these were manufacturers that I had found on Alibaba and, had worked with for quite some time, but had just never had the opportunity, obviously, to meet face to face. So that was a really cool part of the trip too. So if you already have manufacturers, be sure and let them know that you're coming, because if anyone is somewhat close to Yiwu, it's important to them to meet you face to face, and they'll make that time. You can also probably go tour their factories. A couple of them wanted me to come tour their factory, but I honestly didn't have time in the time that I had allotted for the trip. Obviously I was traveling out of the country to China for my first time, and I wasn't gonna tack on extra time to just get in a car and go travel around to factories by myself. I would have been completely overwhelmed and a little scared to do that. So that's not something that I chose to do on my first trip, but it's definitely something I would do on a future trip. All in all, I had the most incredible trip, and I would highly recommend this trip. I mentioned I'm also looking to go to Canton Fair just to see what that experience is like, see how different it is, but just the most amazing experience on this trip. Whether you make your way to China to source your products or not, I hope that you're finding a way to pursue your dream of starting your own business. If you're looking for more information on my journey to becoming a 7-figure entrepreneur, be sure and check out my 5-part series. This is the first video that will walk you through the backstory of how I got started.